Welcome to the Me, You and Data podcast, the podcast that uncovers insights from leading data science and analytics professionals globally to enable you to grow your career, teams and business. I'm Joseph Carla, your host and founder at 633 who bring you this podcast. We hope you get value from this episode. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Me, You and Data podcast. Today I'm delighted to have someone that most of you are probably familiar with, Eddie Short, and we're going to be discussing the 7 habits of highly effective chief data officers and much more. And I'm not going to introduce you, Eddie. I'll let you have the pleasure of introducing yourself. So do you mind just giving the audience an introduction into what you're doing now, who you are and kind of your experience, and transparently as well, a bit of the strap lines of your expertise and kind of what you've done for organizations.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Joseph. I'm, you could say, an old timer, if you'd say. Interesting enough, I built my first expert system, which we call an AI system, back in 1989 at university. So I've been really out a full-time data, analytics and AI professional for 25, 26 years. I think my career kind of took off when I was working at Capgemini and I was given the problem of doing their data strategy back in 2003. And from there, it was kind of like, well, this looks quite interesting. Would you be interested in running it? And I started off with 6 people who did data migration.
Yeah.
And over the next 5 or 6 years, I built out the practice from data migration through to the classical reporting, data warehousing, data architecture. And I created a concept then, which I called creating the intelligent enterprise. I wanted to say from business intelligence to intelligent business. But my boss at the time said, well, half of our clients are in the public sector. You can't call it intelligent business. Otherwise, you'll alienate those public sector clients. Anyway, we did great work. We worked in many industries and became global leader of this capability. Coming up to 2008, though, I was a bit frustrated because largely we worked with CIOs. And I'd had a battle with Gartner saying, can't we change this? CIOs, they don't do anything with data and information. Can't we? We want to be the people who turn data into something valuable. For me was like information. Anyway, I became what would now be called Chief Data Officer at British American Tobacco. Never smoked in my life, but I spent 3 years actually helping them, and this was kind of probably a turning point for me, go from being a multinational, a country-by-country organization to being a truly global business. Yeah. And we spent better part of £100 million transforming the entire operating model, marketing, sales, operations, supply chain, country level, regional level, group level. And having done that transformation, it's kind of, what do I do now? I went back into consulting and joined KPMG as a partner and spent 5 years there, firstly fixing their UK and European practice, and then in helping to build what would now be called an accelerator on an investment thing, which was called KPMG Capital. We made several investments. I wasn't responsible for the investments. I was responsible for exploiting and building the platforms. And as an example, we made with the first and probably the only solution that monetized IBM's Watson platform in Europe, which was effectively a forensic due diligence platform. If you're a company which invests in many hundreds of countries, many dozens of countries, how do you avoid investing in an entity that's basically the front company of a drug dealer or a politically exposed person? Classically, a big data problem. We sucked in data from all over the world, LexisNexis, Factiva, FBI, and we sell them information as a service. To kind of say, you can't guarantee it. You don't buy a guarantee from a KPMG, but you get a traffic light kind of report. Yeah. And having done that, I spent 3 years with AON, basically pioneering human capital and talent, people analytics. How do you help people perform better? One of my frustrations in that was I thought HR, that would be the place where you can actually look at how improving the performance of people. But probably what I should have done better, HR really has very little to do with the performance of people. It's all to do with the protection of the, you would say, franchise of an operation and its people. But we actually built some solutions because we actually collected pay data, reward data, psychometric tests, employee assessments. And we started to look, as an example, in a bank. How do you have your star banker, one of the, but everybody else who say the median, how do you move the median banker closer to the star banker? And we can identify attributes, not just pay, because pay is typically something that makes people unhappy. You never paid too much. You're always complaining that you paid too little. Classic problem in the data science world. You're not paid enough. But you can look at what drives and motivates people, and we help to identify with a number of banks and other companies. Can you coach on develop some of these people to be 20% better? Yeah, and using that, they sold a bunch of that business off to a private equity business called Blackstone, and then I set up on my own, and I ended up working up at Telefonica. And I think now I'd be called Chief Data and Analytics Officer, but they brought me in initially as a consultant. It's like, we want a partner to come in and do our strategy. And the big consultancies don't sell partners unless they sell 20 people.
Yeah.
But they got me in, and I did the data strategy and analytics strategy, working with the chief commercial officer, chief operating officer, chief financial officer. And the CEO, after 2 months, said, "This is great, but I've had 5 of these strategies in 7 years. What's the difference between yours and those? Because they've all failed."
Yeah.
I said it's all about execution to Mark Evans, the CEO. And he said, "But Eddie, you're a contractor, consultant." And they convinced me to join. And I spent the next 3 years doing what we would now be called revenue and operational transformation. We actually transformed marketing, sales, and service. We improved the bottom line by about £100 million for the Telefonica O2 business. We started to look at all sorts of things. How can you connect data for charging networks and electric cars and all sorts of exciting things. But what it was a business transformation. I would say there's been the tales of woe since then, because we then merged with Virgin Media in the UK to form Virgin Media and AON.
Yes, yeah.
That didn't go so well, because they said we can build a better technology mousetrap. The answer is Google Cloud Platform.
Yeah.
And
GCP.
VMO2 won some nice awards from Google for all their work on. But for me, it was kind of really a question of, well, I'm integrating my team into Virgin Media. I said it won't work. Let's say they've spent an awful lot of money and delivered very little on that technology journey. Meanwhile, I went into advising a private equity business.
Yeah.
And I've spent the last 2 years as an operating partner, which basically means private equity is largely investment bankers with money to invest in companies. And then they get some trusty sidekicks. You know your place in the world, your trusty sidekick who can actually work with the CEOs of the companies to actually improve them. And as an example, I've been working with companies in Central and Eastern Europe. Profi, which is the largest retailer in Romania, as an example. 2 years ago, it was the best and largest offline retailer. Now it's the best digital retailer in Romania, down to them with my assistance guidance. And we are just selling that business for a significantly larger amount of money than we would have sold it as just an offline retailer. So
amazing.
I'm working with telecoms companies. I'm working with healthcare businesses, retail and tech companies. And I'm bringing it all back to saying, basically said, really any kind of business to consumer type organization, although you need to understand something about the industry, the issues about driving performance largely come down to data analytics and increasingly AI. And the solutions are 80-90% the same. You have to put the skin of that industry. And classically, we'll get into the research. It's not about the technology is the enabler. It is the table stakes. But those people who think of that as we implement the technology and wonders happen.
Yeah, that's it.
It's all about how you leverage the technology and what you do with it to drive performance through data. So I'll pause at that point.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. And it seems as though where you're in your career now, in the PE space, where it's pretty much the crux of it is value creation. You're kind of really able to bring through all of that experience. And something that we've kind of spoken about and you speak a lot about is the intelligent business. Do you mind just giving the audience an understanding of what you mean by the intelligent business, and also kind of what made you coin that phraseology, if you will?
Well, it's interesting because, as I said, it goes back 20 years. Capgemini at the time, or Capgemini and Young, we had a term called the adaptive enterprise. And it was about an organization that can read, react, and respond to environment and almost like reconfigure itself. That was the genesis of service-oriented architecture in IT. And I basically said, well, the missing link in a lot of this is data. We have a people, process, and technology world, and data is always the output. And we spend all this time, basically, as I say, putting Humpty Dumpty back together again with data to tell you what's happened. How do we make data a built-in as opposed to a bolt-on? That was the genesis. And then 20 years later, as we'll get onto it, I've been looking at combining my professional experience with some research to say, how do you deliver sustained competitive performance? And it struck me to resurrect that term. I'd been through various iterations of it through my career, but the intelligent business struck me. And how do I define an intelligent business? It's a business that can understand its environment, respond and predict what's happening in the environment, and then use that insight to dynamically reconfigure itself to better serve its customers and better compete in its marketplace. It's not just about responding, it's also about predicting. And effectively, it's an agile business. And now my theorem is that is what I would call the last transformation that any significant company has to do, because once you've got to a position where you can dynamically reconfigure yourself, you'll never need to transform again. But to get to that place is a significant change. And it is a way moving away from process-centric to the point where instead of a process, and I think about that, you think about this, so we have things like enterprise resource planning, customer relationship management. You document process A, B, C, D. You end up with purchase to pay.
Yeah.
You end up with record to report.
Yeah.
But if you look at how we interact in our multi-channel world, we have our phones, we have our watches. we have face-to-face still.
Yeah.
We have email, social.
Yeah.
You need to be able to connect all those different channels and be able to simultaneously understand where is my customer in their journey. If you try and document all those potential processes in journeys, you'll be spending months, if not years.
Yeah.
You actually need to know what are the activities, and then you actually need to use data and AI to be able to dynamically reconfigure those journeys. So we need to break away from those kind of hard-coded processes. I mean, still, in a classical manufacturing sense, when you make a car, even whether it's electric with a battery or still an internal combustion engine, you need to have a chassis before you can put wheels on it and before you can put the engine in. But in most cases, 90% of our economy, if you include the government, is a service-based. And you can do it in many different orders. And so that's what this is about, being able to dynamically reconfigure yourself.
Yeah, yeah. And can you kind of point us to any tangible examples of organizations have a business in mind beginning with the letter A?
When I bring that to the academic research, the baseline model I use is Amazon.
Yeah.
And Amazon, clearly they were the bookseller, and then they became the everything store. And in 2001, post the dot-com crash, Jeff Bezos sat down and said, how do we go forward? What's the future? Like many people read lots of books. He read Good to Great from Jim Collins, classic book in the early 80s. That says you need to build a capability flywheel. And you have what he calls a hedgehog. What is your star capability? What is the capability that's going to differentiate yourself? And for Amazon, it was marketing. And basically, Bezos sat down and said, we want to use our marketing to drive better customer experience. And we use that to drive better relationships with sellers. That drives better product range. We have to drive more products onto our site. We drive better things with customers. And in order to do that, we need to do data and analytics, and ultimately then AI to basically spin that flywheel faster and faster, and faster than any competitor. So that ability to do things and you say dynamically reconfigure based on, because it is, I mean, Amazon is not typically your classical omni-channel business, even though now today they do have some retail stores. Yeah. But now 20 years on, you can apply that into either a single channel business or an omni-channel business, and that's a kind of.
Yeah. And you kind of mentioned the academic research, and that's something that I wanted to touch on kind of towards the end, but I think it just makes sense to speak a little bit about it now. And like, there's a lot of research out there as it relates to business processes, but in the data space, there's more kind of case studies or books speaking about, ways to optimize and stuff. Why do you think there isn't as much research, and kind of what are you doing in that space right now? Do you mind kind of sharing a bit of that with the audience?
Partly it's because a lot of the focus has gone on technology. I think if you look at 2 or 3 of the, I would say, top American professors who've been in this space, Tom Davenport, he released a seminal book, Competing on Analytics, in 2006. Yeah. And then there's been Andrew McAfee and Eric Bryn-Jolson who produced some books. But a lot of it was really the technology of data, the technology of analytics. And then in and amongst that, there's been many case studies, as you mentioned. But people who say, how do we do it in an empirical basis? How do I do this? Because it leads yourself back to the thing, I need to build the technology. Now, if I use the hedgehog example of Amazon in marketing, what I've looked at into research, and where there has been some research, and I'm trying to build on that, on a Doctor of Business Administration, you can call it a professional PhD. Yeah. Because you say, well, actually, I'm in my 50s, I've got 30 years experience. How do I don't still want to do purely academic, it's more practical. But to take that thing, everybody's familiar with things like Porter's 5 forces, and I would say that's the external environment, about your customers and suppliers. Using the Jim Collins type of analogy, there is a thing called resource-based theory, which is sort of saying, what are the capabilities in your business which you will choose to invest in to make you a differentiator? So you use the Amazon example of marketing. Now, those capabilities have got to be, they have 4 dimensions. Valuable, which kind of sounds obvious, but when we look at the data world, people often don't really know what value is. And it does get confused with things like ESG and sustainability, but I use value. What are the KPIs that the CEO is measured on? That for me is usually typically the value driver. Rare. Now, rare means because if you want to differentiate yourself, you want to have something that's rare. So it's, and then linked to that is inimitable, which means difficult to copy. So it's got to be rare and difficult to copy. And then last but no means least, for it to be truly differentiating, it's got to be embedded in the organization. Now, so you bear that in mind of where we've got to in the, you'd say, somewhat challenged world of data and analytics. Value is sometimes lost, and the focus goes on the technology, which is neither rare nor difficult to copy. I mean, yeah, if those ERP systems that took people 10 years to put in and they're embedded, they can be difficult to copy. But politely, I would say if you look at SAP's view of the world or Salesforce's view of the world, you as a business are getting Salesforce's system and SAP. How is that a source of differentiation for you? But if I look at it in the data world, pick Google Cloud Platform, AWS or Azure, point by point, there might be some differentiations. But in reality, pick one. Pick one of Click, Power BI, and Tableau. Pick one, a data science platform. Because really the thing is about value and organizationally embedded. Okay. And if you look at the recent research, I think Wavestone's latest research at the beginning of the end of the year, they surveyed CDOs and some CTOs. Funnily enough, 90% of them said the problems with this are culture and change. And I say, more fool you, because that's your job. They're thinking, most of them are thinking about the technology implementation. Yeah. Actually, your job, if you're leading the data and analytics of a business, is all about culture and change. And that, as we'll get on to, led to, well, how do you put that? That great, we'll codify that. And then what are then the habits that you have to put in place? And I've then created this kind of concept of the 7 habits of the highly effective chief data officer, or you can almost flip it on its side, the highly effective data-enabled AI-powered organization.
Love that. And I think that perfectly segues us into the 7 habits. So habit number 1, customer is king or queen. Do you mind breaking that down for the audience? Because I think that most organizations would say, oh yeah, of course, like we're obsessed with the customer, of course but like how should that play out tangibly to actually benefit an organization?
Well, I think exactly to your point, Joseph, if you look to a business leader, they go, absolutely, my customer is king. We are a customer-led organization. When you look at what a lot of data scientists, data and analytics professionals are doing, it's often nothing to do with customers. They're not working with marketing. They're working with finance. They're working in IT, building platforms. They're not working, you'd say, at the coalface. And a great quote I got from my boss when I was at AON, Greg Case, he said, there are only 2 types of people in our organization, those who serve customers and those who serve people who serve customers. If you or your team cannot put yourself in one of those 2 buckets, please leave the business. And unfortunately, we find, you have to go back to it as a data and analytics professionals. What are you doing that serves the customers of this business? And then we know, you look at things like, we want to do personalization. We want to do know your customer. And I often use the great Steve Jobs quote, my customers will know what they want when I show it to them. Yeah. Well, Steve was a fantastic inspirational guru marketer. The rest of us are more mortal. But if we combine all of our data, we combine our insights, we can start to predict not just what our customers will want now, but also start to predict what their unmet needs are, that we can develop products and services. Yeah. So it is, for me, number 1, because for many business leaders, it's obvious, but it's a missing link for many data analytics professionals. What are you doing to serve the customer? Yeah, no, perfectly put. And then number 2, and I think you alluded to this a little bit before, but being masters of the external environment. Do you mind, again, just breaking that down? Yeah, so I put this because it then flicks to the other part of data. I would call it the big data. I mean, we say the data we collect internally, normally it's quite structured. We put it into data warehouses, into clouds. But then increasingly, and what has exploded with large language models and generative AI, is there is an awful lot of data outside the organization. And I think this is lesson number 1 for data professionals. We have wasted billions, and I mean billions on data quality. Yeah. And saying, we can't get to a good answer unless my data is really good enough. Well, people have been using Google to search for things. It's dirty data. Large language models are dirty data. You can get good insights from that dirty data, especially if you start to interpret it better. But my point being, that certainly gives you lots of insights about what you could do. But what you could also do, and I use my example from the kind of IBM Watson thing, is bringing in all those external sources. And I talk about ex-colleague of mine at KPMG, Nate Silver, he talked about getting the signals from the noise. That noisy, dirty data has lots of signals in it. But as an example, the wisdom would have been 2.5 years ago, interest rates were going to go up. I had a big argument with my bank manager. I was trying to remortgage my house. I just got remarried. I was saying the interest rates are going higher. He said, no, the bank said it's going to be about 2-3%. The signals were in the noise because there was everything happening about this Russia, there's economic issues, volatility, those things were happening. So when people talk about these blue ocean or black swan events, a lot of that data can actually be turned. If you can start to pull in those things, those insights, you combine that with your structured data, your strong signals with your weak signals. As a good leader, you can help to harness, to help the organization navigate through the chaos and the storm. And I think that's really critical because we do find ourselves in a very volatile and uncertain world.
And like you touched on something there, which I've seen you explain elsewhere as well, kind of weak signals versus strong signals. Do you mind just kind of breaking that down a little bit further, just so that people kind of understand what you mean by that and how they can kind of utilize that to draw relevant insights from external environment?
Well, so I think a strong signal, as I said, you can build a churn model, you can build a propensity model from your structured data. Is my customer going to leave? Do I need to invest money to... I think as you use machine learning, you can really build on human expertise and build that customer is going to do something, we need to make an intervention. Weak signals are those things which are not so readily apparent. They are more hidden, and there is an element of interpretation. It's trying to drain from, you'd say, all that things like large language models, from publicly available data sources, from stock market data. What are things which could be upsetting the levers of your business? And I think that is when your leadership skills come in, and what your business needs to say, say over here, if we follow the herd, which say politicians, economists and others follow the herd, now we need to just create some scenarios for our business and use scenario planning to say, if something happens, what can we do? And what you're really doing with weak signals is providing the business with optionality. That's the thing. So you say to the CEO, right, we think something might be coming. It's maybe 30-40% probability. He says, well, if you get a bit more information, what do I do? What do I need to provision? What finance need to put something on the side? So I think that's what you've got to do. And it's about your leadership role. It's not saying this is certain. But on the other side, you say he's trying to get away from the chaos theory of, a butterfly flaps in the Pacific Ocean and causes a hurricane in the Atlantic. You want to be able to distill that down. And so it is, being able to give them optionality.
And like, just following up from that, in your experience, Eddie, with regards to C-suite kind of listening to those options and stuff, is there ever some hesitancy, and how do kind of CDOs overcome that if it's kind of like, okay, 80% likelihood that something's going to happen?
We have to have a reality check. Many leadership decisions are still made on the most important person in the room, the wisdom of the CEO or the C-suite. They're the highest person, they're the expert. I think for me, it's about educating and going back to some basic business theory, wisdom of crowds. However smart you are, if we can put 100 people who are 50% as smart as you, they're gonna be smarter than you. What we're trying to create is a brain for our business. It's about helping our business navigate the future. And the more that we can pack into that brain and then distill it to a way that the human can interpret, we're about making humans better informed. And there's more and more research. So, Google just released their research, which shows Google's AMIE AI model will outperform pretty much any doctor worldwide in terms of diagnosis. Full stop. And they've got 4 different levels. This is the classical performance of a doctor. This is a doctor powered by a Google search or something. This is a doctor powered by our model, and this is the AI model. Now, I think we have to educate people on change management and the journey, which is, we're not all Steve Jobs, but fewer and fewer Steve Jobses can make a difference in the world. We need to, I would say, it's about augmenting and improving how humans work as opposed to replacing human decision making. It's change management.
No, perfectly put. And often something that technology folks don't really put change management together with their role. So no, well said. Habit number 3 is building a data-driven business model. Do you mind?
Yeah, and I've kind of expanded that to, I call it a metric data-driven business model, because I come back to the Amazon model. It's about leading indicators. So typically, if you're in the data world, and the poor relations these days are the people who do reporting and dashboards and business intelligence, but that's typically tracking the classic backward-looking insight in terms of the lagging indicators, revenue, sales, EBITDA, how we did. What we need to do, and use the Amazon model, it's like, how much traffic do we generate? What is our conversion rate? What's the categories that we've got on our platform? What are the things that, as a business manager, if you change it, it's going to deliver future revenue? And there are many, you'd say, Six Sigma and other metric type models, but you can say there's well-known one of Uber: observe, orientate, decide, and act. It's like if a particular leading indicator is behind, we know we have to orientate ourselves, make a decision, move it forward. You put those metrics, they become the basis of the data. Those data push them into value drivers, and they eventually flow up to the KPIs of the business. But it is ultimately, come back to value, aligning data to value and metrics where people and business leaders can pull levers to actually make decisions that will move the business ahead.
Yeah, and I really love this habit because it also puts emphasis on the fact that it's input and output as well, because sometimes that gets lost. So number 4 is governance and regulation. A lot of people are going, but it's your friend, not your enemy.
I had a phrase at KPMG, which was risk and performance, two sides of the same data. I wasn't a very popular partner when I went to one of our global financial services partners and said, why are we doing the same project 5 times? And I said, what do you mean 5 times for this bank? Well, we're doing a project in the front office with in wealth management. We're doing a project in compliance. We're doing a similar project in risk. We're doing some project over there with the middle office in a bank, and we're doing another one over there. He said, well, that's what the customer wants. That's what they've asked us to do, the different part. I said, well, I can tell you, there's 5 projects. If we spent 1.5 to 2 times, instead of one of those projects, instead of 5 projects, we can deliver all that value. Of course, that wasn't what he wanted to hear, but it's the right thing for the customer. And if you look at, simplistically, if you look at it from a banking perspective, big measure of banking was about standards, mis-selling of products, make sure. And they spent billions again in the 2010s, which was the generation of the chief data officer on a thing called BSB 239, and know your customer. But ultimately, it's sort of saying, do we know our customers? Do we know where they got their money from? Do we know what we're selling to them, why we're selling to them? And can we evidence that to a regulator? Now, I'm looking at that data and thinking, that's exactly the same sort of data I need to make sure I'm selling the right products at the right price. It's effectively what I need for a regulator. It's what I need to market and sell to them. And that's why I say you can do this, and that's what we did at Telefonica. We create a single solution. Yeah, there's variances on it. There's different pathways or journeys through the data. You have to have some kind of regulation and governance on it. But ultimately, I say most regulators, whether they're healthcare, financial services, data protection, they're not stupid. They're reasonably smart people. They're trying to do the right thing. And if you work with them, they will help you. And as I say, you can truly kill more than 2 birds with 1 stone.
Yeah, perfect. And number 5 is migrating to data-driven architecture in the cloud. I'm assuming the likes of Google, Salesforce may not necessarily thank you for this, but do you mind sharing the truth about this habit?
So I talked about this from almost like 20 years ago. We had service-oriented architecture. Today, if you talk to e-commerce, they talk about microservices, APIs, cloud, headless. What I've described as the intelligent business, being able to dynamically reconfigure itself, you need effectively that microservice API cloud headless model. If you then look at it from a data perspective and with machine learning, when we start to build churn and propensity models, use Salesforce, we start to suck the logic out of the Salesforce systems, the SAP systems, the Oracle systems, and we're putting them from those what used to be called systems of record into a data and analytics layer, which increasingly I would say is the decisioning brain of the business. And as you suck more logic out, you suddenly find we're not using half the platform, and suddenly we can create these kind of, and I've talked earlier about being able to dynamically reconfigure activities. Activities can be represented in technology terms as microservices. You are not going to basically rip out an SAP or a Salesforce in 12, 18, 24 months. It takes long, but gradually you evolve into this architecture, and we are moving more of our data to the cloud. And if you think then your brain of the business is in that cloud, that brain is then outputting data democratization to service the reporting analytical needs of the COO, the CFO. It's also driving your system, your processes, and your so-called systems of record suddenly become systems of processes and gradually become more and more microservices. You see that as the data and analytics, in brackets AI leader, you are suddenly holding the entire intellectual property and decisioning engine of the business. You are completing, this is the technology enablement of that complete business transformation. So it is a journey. And as I said, I put it as like habit number 5 because it's part of your journey. Some people would see it as the be all and end all. This is where we start.
Yeah.
Well, finance can say, all right, we're going to be building all these different things. That's how much it's going to cost. You've got to do the other things. Go back to customer is king and queen first. Get their master. But that is one of your key parts of your journey.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And I guess as you kind of migrate away from these bigger platforms like Salesforce and stuff, you also save money.
Yeah, well, I mean, as somebody who's been in the tech industry and worked with a lot of suppliers, it is an 80-20 world. Typically, your average customer is using 20% of what they pay for from Microsoft or Salesforce or Google or from SAP or Oracle. And so as you can simplify that, you can significantly reduce your spend.
Reduce your spend too. Good stuff. So definitely benefits there. And then habit number 6 is servant leadership and data serving people. Again, like I've had people on this podcast, and it's interesting how important people are, but how often people get missed in the kind of success of a data business. So do you mind elaborating on that habit?
Yeah, I mentioned it a couple of times, but I used the intelligent business and then talked about decisioning brain. For me, it's about making people better decisioners. You'd say in all business speak, it's the wisdom of crowds. You know, we're bringing all that knowledge and insight together to an individual to help them make better decisions or automate decisions where a human sets the rules and then the decisions are made by the machine. Now, servant leadership, again, is one of those interesting concepts. It's about saying, it comes back to a point about your customers. Now, from what we said in this, as the data and analytics leader, your customers are your team, your people within the business, and the external customers. And much has been spent and wasted on data monetization, the term data monetization. The reality is very few organizations actually sell data. Some have some businesses, there's Kantar and others, collect retail data and sell it as a service. For the majority of us, it's really about improving those processes. We create data products, or sometimes I say data services, but they are about improving different parts of the business. And it's as a data and analytics leader, your success is typically measured by making everybody else successful. Yeah. So I was in it with Telefonica or AON. We get to the point of saying we can have a debate between the chief marketing officer, the head of brand, the financial controller, the sales director. The reality is you cannot do this solution without my help. Now, we can debate from a business case perspective, am I 50% responsible for this, 75% or 25%? We get to an equitable thing. That's part of a leadership thing. Yeah. There is an element of subjectivity because it's humans, but you get to that point of saying we are building these products and services, and our success is basically marketing, sell these new products. And so it's that combined value creation. My success and our success is if everybody else is successful. So you have to look after your team, and the data serves everybody. And we come back to that point about the intelligent business is when its data is built into the DNA of the business.
Yes, yeah.
You are serving everybody from the CEO to all the way down the organization. Everybody who serves a customer, the people who support those people who serve a customer. And there aren't any prizes for sitting there going, oh yeah, I made £1 million with my data solution, or 10 million. No, it's irrelevant. Those guys got the results, and everybody knows that they couldn't have done it without us.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And I've heard you speak about and write about the kind of citizen data scientist within that model. Do you mind explaining what you mean by that and the importance of like different roles within the business?
Well, yeah. So I think bringing it back to the academic theory, I think hopefully what you start to see is the DNA of the business. It's organizationally embedding it. Everybody is data powered, and people do data literacy and this, but it's actually everybody is able to use, leverage, and exploit data. Now, for me, organizationally, to make this work, I'd say I set up what I call a hub and spoke model. There has to be a central team that drives the strategy, or some people say the tactics that basically are making things happen. But the reality is you want the people who are going to make things happen in marketing, or going to happen in finance, in sales. They need to be embedded in marketing, in finance, in sales. The spoke means that they need to be hardwired, though, into that hub. You can't have a bunch of people, mavericks, doing their own thing. It's like, oh, we're in finance. We don't trust those people in marketing. We're going to do it. You want to have common tools. As that point saying, the tools are an enabler. People talk about the wonder of mesh. Well, the reality is, yes, you want to be able to have pockets, but you need to have that organizational, and you need to have governance and control so that the CEO and regulators and others can see that things are controlled. But you say, for me, it's about a matrix model. And that means then if you've empowered the entire organization, this almost goes back to why does everybody still use Excel? People love Excel because in 10 minutes, anybody can create a chart.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is that people are making wizard decisions using that charts, and people can change the data to manipulate it. What we are doing is basically giving everybody, Excel on steroids, so that depending on how sophisticated they want to be, you can say whether you call them a data scientist or a data analyst, people have access to controlled data, which means that, if somebody in finance is using it, it's the same data as somebody in sales, somebody in marketing. But you want to get a different perspective because they want to make different decisions. You're empowering them to do that with the tools and capabilities so that they can be, as they call, citizen data scientists. You don't want to try to say, oh yeah, I've got 10 data scientists in my team. They'll do it all for you. People believe it more. They trust it more if somebody close to them has worked with them.
Embedded in their team. Yeah, no, well put. And habit number 7 is data strategy spins the business strategy. What do you mean by that?
Yes, I think it brings it all back together. And I use the term spins the business strategy. It's going back to the flywheel concept. The other 6 habits are, you'd say, the tactics. And I quote often Omar Bradley, who was the last 5-star general in the US. It's a strategy that's for amateurs. Professionals talk about logistics. Now, for the rest of logistics in army or whatever term, we talk about tactics. It's what are the activities that we're going to do to realize that strategy? I'm not in the business, and I don't think anybody here in the data would say our mission as a business is blah blah blah. That you can work with whichever strategy firm or your CEO. Our view is how do we operationalize that strategy and execute it better than anybody else? We want the flywheel. We want to use data analytics and AI to spin that flywheel better than anybody else. So it's all about putting the plan together around all the other 6 habits, which are, you'd say, the people, the data, the AI. And there is some process and technology, but I would call those second order things. And you bring that together with a plan, with a business case, and it's a journey. And that is your 7th habit, the ability to drive that transformation. As we said, the reason most of these things fail is about culture and change. So as the leader, you've got to be the person driving that culture and change. Your team are the people executing the other 6 things. You're the person making, I'm saying, that servant leadership, the change management, the culture, the behavior. You are bringing that to life, and that is your job, and making sure the team can execute the rest. And that's where you get to data and AI spins the business strategy.
Yeah, no, perfect and well articulated. Those 7 habits. A couple of follow-up questions, and I kind of wanted your thoughts on a few things. I think in the data space at the moment, there's obviously a lot of chief data officers, probably too much chief data officers. What is, in your estimations, an actual chief data officer? Because as a recruiter in this space, there's a lot of people who aren't really chief data officers or are sitting in IT versus the business. Do you mind kind of just elaborating what your thoughts are on what a chief data officer is and should be?
So I think you'd say there is the kind of what is a chief data officer today versus what it should be. I think ultimately to drive those 7 habits, it's about being a transformational agent. We call it a chief transformation officer. And I put that in my own shoes and say, well, the reality is if I looked at, say, it's easy to say in a bank, banks have a function usually called a COO. And that typically function runs everything that is the back office of the bank. And it includes data, IT, operations, process. Typically today run by an IT professional. To take this to the next level, I would say, use my model, data and analytics are the 1 ring or 2 rings to rule them all. We have to step into that role. And we have to be the people who takes it further into this transformation, because I'll put cards on the table. If I go to a bank, or other words, those people are frightened, and I use that word frightened, too scared, and therefore should get out of the way because they're held back by their inability to switch off legacy. I started, as I said, in data migration. I could switch off legacy. I know how to get it because actually it's data. It's about getting the data. It's a dirty job, but you switch it off. But you also, those are part of the tactics you have to get in. Now, where are chief data officers today? Many of them work in IT. There's a big push. Finance have seen, well, we should take on this role of because part of our job is data, because we win the numbers. For me, finance is not the right place because financial numbers are but one use case, really. And the problem with finance is they're always trying to be both business leader and and also the referee in terms of what we should make. Whereas I come back to, they can't deliver on function 6.
No.
They cannot be servant leaders. You'd say in theory could be servant leaders, but they are not in a position to drive you kind of the value chain equation. They're not in the equation. And most CIOs, IT leaders, are driven by cost, and basically that process leads to technology model. Yeah. It's a different model, and same with CTOs. So for me, to become a chief data officer, you need to be good at one of the dimensions. You kind of could be the data, it could be the analytics. For me, they're like yin and yang. Yeah, you can't exploit it without the analytics, but you can't get great analytics without great data. So, those people, you call them heads of data analytics. Yeah. You're only really a chief if you're really making a difference to the CEO. And I think that's, so the title is bandied around so often. It's like, for my book, you're only a chief if the CEO really thinks you're a chief. And really, are you influencing the KPIs of the CEO? Yeah. And if you are, and actually, if you follow the 7 habits, you will be. Yeah. Then you merit the title. But it is a different job. It's not about the structuring of data. It's not about how many data scientists you've got. All those things are components. Yeah. But it's about how you lead the organization through change.
Yeah. And how you kind of influence the CEO and really being that right-hand man or woman to the CEO to drive those decisions. No, so really well put. And as we kind of wrap up, I always wrap up putting the career spotlight on you a little bit as it relates to, your career, and some advice and gems and piece of wisdom that you can share with the audience in terms of how you got to where you are today. So a few questions on that. Obviously, you've always been very technical, but have also transitioned quite smoothly into, a business facing leadership role. What are some tips that you can give people who are perhaps more technical and maybe have some attributes to be more business facing, kind of make that transition, especially as they step into leadership?
Yeah, I think it's all a journey. I mean, I think in the first 10 years of my career, I exhibited all the characteristics of somebody who's on the autistic spectrum. Okay. Yeah, I call it a high-functioning autistic person. And when I look back and people talk about when I was at school, I was a high-functioning autistic person. But that's not uncommon for people who say doing with technical engineering, data science type careers. Seminal point for me was back in about 2003 when I'd done this strategy. And a recruiter who earned a lot of money off me, recruiting people, said to me, "Eddie, you seem to be a good engineer, but you seem to be a great leader of engineers." And at that point, I described myself as the one-eyed man in the land of the blind, because in the kind of more autistic engineering type people, they're not very people. Yeah. So I'd say at that point, I was brilliant compared to non-engineers, but compared to engineers, I was very good. And what I found was that I was very good at leading people. And I described myself as a field commander. I wanted to be close to the action without actually sitting on my team and interfering with them. By doing that and by building out the strategy at Capgemini, took all these different capabilities together. I was the person who could fit the jigsaw puzzle together. So logically, people say, all right, yeah, we're great at this and I'm great at that. But actually, suddenly Eddie's created this bigger playing field. And that's how I did that. And I think what's important for me, which I think is where most data leaders struggle with, is in doing that, and when I was at Capgemini and KPMG, I ran a profit and loss account. Yeah. I was a general manager. Yeah. I was responsible for the utilization of people, the revenue of people, the cost of those people. And if we made a nice profit, I could pay them more and then return more to the business. And so when you are the business, because you say, I am the business, you learn all those disciplines, which I think people forget when the point about being a servant leader. If you're making everybody else successful, great. But then you have to still have a line of sight to what's the value you bring to the table. So having spent the time at Capgemini, then I was able to work at BAT and work with an extended executive team of a FTSE 10 company. Yeah. And then was much more of a business type of consultant at KPMG and AON. And I bring that full circle to say at Telefonica O2, I completed a revenue customer sales service transformation. Just happened to be powered by data analytics because that's what you would need to basically drive it forward. And now you say I work as an operating partner. So it's always about bringing line of sight to the value for the business, because that's what CEOs care about. And if you want to drive that change management, you have to say, well, how does what I do come back to drive the value of the business?
Perfect. And last question, something you might have to think about a little bit, but what is the best piece of advice that you've received in your career, or one of the best pieces? Like, you can pick one or two, but what really kind of stands out and really helped you in your career?
One of those ones is relatively straightforward. I was working at Capgemini back in 2006.
Yeah.
And my boss at the time was a guy called Nigel Kirby-Green, fantastic guy, classic, been a management consultant, sales guy, ran our public sector business, then became CEO of our technology business. And he elevated me onto his core leadership team. And he said to me, Eddie, I brought you up here because you're building one of the fastest growing businesses. He said, the problem is some of your colleagues find you to be an annoying git. Why do you think that is? As a result of that, ended up having to go for some coaching. But what it came down to was I wanted to be appreciated. I wanted to show that I thought I was delivering value. And to that point, it's learning to articulate your stories, learning to tell stories, which I think is kind of become a bit of a hackneyed phrase in the world of data. There are people who do that. Storytelling. But it is such an important thing. It's not about saying I'm wonderful. As I said, the servant leadership thing is our success is making everybody else's success. And you get the ultimate reflected glory that they realize they couldn't have done that without you. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to be loved and appreciated. At the same sort of time, just as I was kind of setting up that practice, but you could say it was almost like, but it's a problem for all of us who are autistic. He said, Eddie, you're known by quite a lot of people as Mr. Spock.
Okay.
Because you seemingly trying to beat people to death with logic.
Okay.
Because we take the data view, A follows B follows C, mathematically, this therefore is the right answer. Yeah. And if you disagree with it, you're wrong.
You're wrong.
I can prove you're wrong because da, da, da.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that's the challenge for a lot of people in the data space. Just because you think it's the right thing, and actually you can prove that there's causation between what you're doing, that doesn't always change the mind of a CEO, because that's what I'm saying. They are still in that kind of insight, my experience, I don't trust what you're doing. You haven't built the confidence with me. So you have to, again, take people on a journey. And I think that's the other thing. So there's the storytelling, but it's about the journey. And what I bring all those things together with for people is saying, with all this journey, is about saying, we want to go in a position, show people what's the art of the possible. Where could we be in 12, 24, 36 months' time? Bring that back to what's the art of the probable. Where can we be in the next 3 months, 6 months' time? And the brilliant thing with data and analytics is you can show them. And as you evolve, you can keep showing them. Yeah. And it's that showing people, so not just telling the story, picture paints 1,000 words. The more the dashboard, the evolution, the visualization evolves, you take people on that journey and they believe it. And you probably never get to that art of the possible. You might get somewhere different. You might even get somewhere better. But it's that journey, powered by the stories, powered by the data, that's kind of, those are my kind of pearls of wisdom. Yeah, no, fantastic. And that's very useful, perfect way to end. I think that storytelling piece, taking people on a journey, and also in that process of kind of your mindset shift or transformation, there's a lot of humility in there as well, to want to learn, to want to kind of do things in a way that other people can understand as well. So super useful. So there we have it. 7 habits of the highly effective chief data officer. Thank you so much for your time today, Eddie Short. It's been a pleasure. And I'm sure that the audience will get lots of value. Before we wrap up, do you mind just kind of telling the audience about kind of where they can find you, where they can find the newsletter, and if they want to kind of know a bit more about your methodologies and approach? Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn as Eddie Short, and I am LinkedIn Eddie S. So it's quite short because I've been on there a long time. There is a specific intelligent business blog, but you'll also find, if you DM me, you can see that, you can follow me. There is a website that I have, which is called trins.co.uk, which is Transformation Insight, but that's kind of, but TRINS. A lot of the things are posted on there as articles. And watch this space, because I say I'm publishing from kind of the business view of the academic research. And I try to get blog posts out at least once a week, but you'll see me commenting regularly on. Yeah. And I think I'm on Medium. I can't remember which, but I just stick to LinkedIn because everybody can get access to it. So. Yeah, no, perfect. Thanks so much. And I'll link everything down in the description wherever you watch or listen to this. So again, thank you, Eddie Short. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching till the end of that episode. Hopefully you found value in that episode. And if you did, then don't forget to subscribe, follow, and also share this episode with others. And if you would like to know more about what we do here at 633, which is to help data professionals find work and help amazing organizations hire technical talent, so don't hesitate to get in touch.